So renewals have happened before. There's been numerous times in history where renewals have occurred. Is there some kind of pattern that renewals follow? Like, are there things that we should be looking out for to identify that a renewal is coming?
Good question. I brought my notebooks, which got 3 whole notebooks, which I just felt like when I studied Renewal and Revival, just filled these with all the different stuff I was reading. And I thought you might ask this, so I had a post-it note ready to go. In Lewis Drummond's biography of Spurgeon, called The Prince of Preachers, he makes the point that a lot of people attribute the success that Spurgeon had to his fantastic preaching. Now, obviously, that was part of it. But he makes the point that actually, really, Spurgeon had studied and understood revival. Like, he was almost a walking revival, Spurgeon. So I was really fascinated in these different leaders, like who revival was connected to their ministry. And what Drummond does is he takes an earlier book by James Burns called The Laws of Revival, and then he bounces off Spurgeon's life and comes up with a number of sort of principles of revival and renewal. So this is one example of that question, which I found helpful. So these are my notes. I'm reading from my notes, not from the book. But the first sort of stage is dark days. Things become extremely dark. People abandon faith. Theology and ethics deteriorate. Lethargy, criticism, cynicism prevail. And a worldliness dominates the church, which becomes pragmatic in its ministry, like driven by human striving rather than the Spirit or God's power. It's almost like a little bit like an addict. It hits rock bottom. That's the second stage, and is dissatisfied. So this remnant forms, and the remnant is sick of the status quo and the poor level of faith and everything really in the moment, and they begin to fervently pray. And this longing for better things. Things are so bad that this longing for things to change. And sometimes we have longings, but what happens at that stage? It's hit rock bottom. So it's a longing accompanied with a desire to do something about it. And desperate intercession, contending prayer begins. Then the third element is a leader or leaders emerge. And this leader emerges who, through everything about them, their character, their actions, embodies the longings and the renewal that's meant to come. The leader gathers up the longings and ideas and the remnant and personifies them, sharpening them and expressing them and giving them visibility. They become like a lightning rod that God is using that person or those people. Sometimes it's very clearly one person. Sometimes it's groups of people. And they become, like a lightning rod for the renewal, or lightning rods. He makes the point that each revival is unique, that while following particular laws, like he argues there are laws, and there's some schools which say there are laws, there's not. I reckon there's some broad, phases that in my reading of it. But he makes the point that each revival is unique. Often we miss the revival that's to come because we're looking back at the last one, thinking it's going to look like that. So every revival is unique. It has its own emphasis, elements, moments, and emphases. Next point, revivals express themselves within a particular cultural context. So they respond to the brokenness in the culture and the particularity of that brokenness. They respond to that. And so in a sense, out of that particular moment, the longings, God's response, the outpouring of the Holy Spirit, out of that context and that problem, then particular movements begin. So you could have Methodism, which comes out of what John Wesley's doing at a particular time in a response to the parish boundaries disappearing, the beginning of people moving from the countryside to the cities. There's the response of people to find new places of meaning and the Spirit to come. The Moravians were this refugee group, completely from different denominations, who the Spirit falls on Count Zinzendorf's estate and goes on to become this incredible missionary movement. All of these renewals and revivals are very unique. And then the last point he makes is that theology returns to orthodoxy. There's a return of simplicity. So it's not like faith's dumbed down, but there's a return to simplicity, and people have breakthrough through understanding theological concepts which previously seemed complex, all of a sudden become no longer just ideas, but actually lived truths. There's a return to the New Testament spirits and methods. The apostolic faith of the early church is sought. The cross becomes central. The truth of the gospel becomes a focal point for preaching. Preaching goes from something which is just like mundane and has to be done to something which is like unction, which has power behind it, which, the Spirit is just infusing. Often the sort of areas of the church which have compromised theologically begin to wither. And there's this just rebirth in areas of just vital, orthodoxy. And there's this great missional push. There's always a missional, evangelistic outpouring that the Spirit doesn't just come to make Christians feel warm, but actually to save people and spread the message of Jesus. And those who had the right beliefs, right orthodoxy, but were cold, all of a sudden become hot. And, the right belief then all of a sudden is met with right action, and the church is renewed. So that's his overview of how he sees renewal happening. I think there's some great things to learn in that.